let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
As the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am Andrew Sullivan, joined as always by my lovely and amazing co-host, Mr. Jonny Rickard. How are you today, sir?
Dude, I'm hanging in there, man. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be back in the saddle. I feel like we've said that a lot.
I know.
It's been 3 weeks because we had, let's see, what was it? There was the What's New. There was the, what else was there? There was something else that conflicted. KubeCon. Yeah. How could I forget KubeCon? And then last week, so 2 weeks ago was supposed to be the What's New. And then they moved it at the last minute due to some Red Hat events going on. And we just didn't have anything. So I think both of us were like, we just won't go. So, yeah. And then last week, it was fortunate that we didn't have anything because I was sick, like completely disconnected for 2 days. Like it's the sickest I've been in years. So I'm glad that I'm feeling better. I'm glad that it didn't cause too much drama. I think the folks who managed the What's News live stream did a great job. So
yeah, went well.
Yeah, I missed interacting with everybody. Normally when we do those things, we have chats and try and answer questions and all that. But c'est la vie, right?
Indeed.
So today's topic is protecting apps with Casten K10 by Veeam. And this is something that I've been looking forward to for a little while. Mark and I, we chatted, like 6 or 8 weeks ago. And it's been a topic that has come up regularly, both here with our audience, as well as kind of across Red Hat and all the various teams that we've talked to. And in particular, I think what really connected us together, Mark, despite the fact that you and I have done other things together, was the OpenShift Virtualization team. They're like, oh, it'd be great if we could talk about, Casten and OpenShift Virt and all this other stuff. So I'm very happy to be joined by 3 members of the Casten team, and I will let them introduce themselves. But Mark, Michael, and Alex. So Mark, I'll ask you to introduce yourself first.
great, thank you. Thanks. We're really happy to be here. And I'm Mark Lavi. I'm new to Casten. I joined right before KubeCon Detroit, North America. So just a little bit more than 6 months in the saddle. And I'm the open source product manager at Casten. Of course, I help with K10, our commercial product, but I'm responsible for helping marshaling our upstream and downstream contributions to KubeVirt, Red Hat Engineering, our own open source projects, which we may talk about a little bit later on, and certainly with K10 product management as well. I'm joined by my 2 colleagues, and I'll let Alex and Michael introduce themselves now.
I will go first. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be there. So my name is Alexandre Ayvé-Cornec. I've joined Casten roughly 1 year ago, a bit more than 1 year ago. And today I go after the pre-sales and the solution architect team for the Casten business unit. So I had the pleasure to work with Michael as a solution architect. So Michael, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. My name is Michael Coursier. I'm solution architect at Casten. And to tell you my story, before in the past, something like 3 years ago, I was an OpenShift admin. Can you believe that? And I was working in a company called Sopra Steria, and we were working since OpenShift 3.6, I believe. Then we moved to 3.7, 3.8, 3.10, 3.11, and one day we had to jump to OpenShift 4. And the question is, how are we going to do that? We were handling something like a lot of cluster with a lot of namespaces, and there was no other solution than migration. So we looked for a tool for migration, and that's how I met Casten. And after that, I moved to some other stuff, and one day Casten called me and asked me to join. So that's why I'm here now. It's been now 3 years I've been working with Casten, but the main reason I work in Casten today is because of this version change, OpenShift 3.11 to 4. So that's my strange story. We can discuss that later on.
I always love hearing stories about, people who because I went through the same thing, hey, I have this technical need, I have this thing, and, you kind of become an expert, and then you end up involved with that vendor and it turns into more.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So, and Steve, thank you for your good wishes there. I'm very happy that I'm feeling better too. And hey, Cadelis, I think that might be Alan. It would be great if Covert could have some kind of BMC, like BMC and Sushi emulator. I don't know if you're a Red Hatter. There's some home lab folks who have been doing crazy things. I don't know if that's one of them, but it might be worth asking over in that community. But the PMs might also be paying attention. I'll be sure to bring it up. So thank you. We really appreciate introducing yourselves. It's always fascinating to me, all the different backgrounds. Vendors, right? As how we get our technical expertise, how we end up at the companies we're at, and all that other stuff. And Mark, like I said, we worked together when you were somewhere else, and now it's good to see you here. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I should also mention I'm based in Austin, Texas, and Alex and Michael are both based in France. If you want to be more specific, gentlemen, please let us know.
Alex is living in Paris, I think. Oh no, you're not living in Paris. You're living near
close
Paris.
to the Paris area, but a little bit outside, basically 1 hour in the south of Paris. So.
And myself, I'm living in a part of France that you American guys should know. It's Normandia. During the Second World War, it's where you guys came to give us freedom. So thank you very much, by the way. And so that's where I'm living. It's a cool place.
Very cool. Yeah. Working for global companies is a blast, in my opinion, because I have folks on my team that are in France, Germany, let's see, New York, North Carolina, India, like just all over the place. I used to make a joke about how like the sun never sets on my empire because we're literally worldwide, and there's always somebody awake and doing something.
Yeah, that's very much true at Casten as well. And about 2 years, coming up on 3 years ago, we were acquired by Veeam, and Veeam is kind of pretty much the global leader in backup and recovery and disaster recovery. So that's a very international company, originally European based and now headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. Yeah. But effectively, I've never been in a more global company, and today is evidenced by my colleagues.
No, I remember Casten before Veeam. I had a number of conversations with you all when I worked for a storage vendor, which was really interesting. So I would say I'm familiar with the technology, but really that was like 5 years ago. So I can't actually say that. I'm sure it's dramatically different now.
Likewise. Coming by KubeCons, finding the 2-person booths and seeing the co-founders of Casten kind of pitching the product is my recollection 5 or 6 years ago as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've come a long way, and we'll get into that shortly, I'm sure.
Sorry, I'm adjusting my audio because I hear the trash truck outside the window banging around. And if I can hear it through here, I'm assuming y'all can hear it through here. So without further ado, Jonny, I don't think we have a ton of top of mind topics to talk about, but I think we're going to push all of those off till next week. This week, I know that we really want to focus on Casten and all of the capabilities there, because when we were talking earlier today, getting ready for this, y'all just had an amazing amount of content, and it's stuff that I'm really excited to talk about and to show the audience. So I think from a top of mind perspective, kind of the biggest thing is Jonny and I are going to start running through a series of streams around what's new for administrators with OpenShift 4.13. So we've got a whole list of stuff. Custom metrics autoscaler, network policy generator, OpenShift virtualization with pipelines, hosted control planes with OpenShift virtualization. Let's see, what else is here? Progressive sync with GitOps. What's GitOps with multiple sources, Jonny? I don't know that one.
Yeah, so GitOps with multiple sources is when you have you have like a Helm chart, and then you have a values file in another repo, so you can actually pull values from another repository. So that way you can have your defaults that go in, and then you can have another source to actually add to that value, or to add values from, and then it allows you to have some flexibility on how you're deploying your applications using GitOps. So it's a pretty cool feature that's come out.
So composable, not a monorepo.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you just essentially point to a values file in another Git repo and pull it in, and then go crazy. So it's something we've been looking for on my team for a long time.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, so I think with that, for our audience, just keep an eye out for the next series of streams. Remember, we will be not streaming during the week of Red Hat Summit. I know I will be at Summit, so if anybody is there, please don't hesitate to come and find me. I'll be in the booth. I'll be doing labs. I think I've got 2 labs, 2 times, just all kinds of stuff going on. So if you see the OpenShift Platform Plus lab, for example, I'll be there along with a few other folks. Yeah,
too.
Awesome. Hopefully we can run into each other. And at this point, Mark, I think I owe you a couple of different beverages of your choice. So, with that, and Jonny, I don't know if you have anything else to add. I say let's start talking about Casten. So
yeah, let's get after.
Mark, as the person with product management in your title, not an engineering focused person, I don't know if you want to open with kind of a description of Casten and what the product does, how it works a little bit, and then maybe if you're able to answer Steve's question there about being VMware focused.
Sure. And again, I'll take a stab at this. I will defer to my colleagues who've got a lot more experience and a lot more time in the field pitching Casten, but I'll do my best job, and they will fill in for me. So, as we mentioned, Veeam acquired us about just a little over 2 years ago, and the company had very much started, I think, almost 7 years prior to that. And Alex and Michael can give me the exact date of when they started, but I remember seeing Casten at pretty much the 2017 KubeCon. And again, just 2 people at a stand-up booth in the vendor pavilion.
2017, you're right.
Yeah. So the very beginning days, and the focus from the very onset was, and it's still our tagline is #1 Kubernetes backup. And what does that really mean? And how do we slot into Veeam? I'll give you the big picture. The long story short is that Veeam is pretty much the global leader in backup and recovery. By millions of measurements, by millions of analysts. I won't go into all of that sales pitch, but long story short is that as far as disaster recovery and backup and even application mobility, Casten is focused on that for Kubernetes and for cloud native workloads, and very much has helped marshal the ability for different cloud storage providers, different cloud providers, different distributions. But we found the most success with OpenShift, clearly, in trying to help people manage their workloads, protect their workloads, secure their workloads, and migrate their workloads. So that's what we do. We do that with simplicity. We do that with incredible scale, and we do that with incredible customization and automation built in. So being able to move a portion of a workload, persistent volumes only, persistent volumes and secrets, looking at a whole Kubernetes namespace, or looking at Kubernetes itself, the cluster, any aspect of Kubernetes, we can basically take a look at all those objects, serialize them, filter them, transform them, back them up, export them, not just on cluster, but off cluster. And that's essential for disaster recovery. And therefore, by the same token, we can automate with policies the import and the restoral, so that we can have active recovery. Basically, continuous disaster recovery is one kind of mode of operation, although most customers aren't comfortable with that. So they basically have disconnected and periodic restores for disaster recovery. But then we handle all of these. We handle all of these as automated policies. And basically, we get to the point where you don't need to do backup and recovery as a post process or something that you add in. With simply annotating a namespace, we can take care of an entire application, all of the objects underneath it, back it up on cluster, export it off cluster, import it on cluster onto the next cluster, And whether that's OpenShift 3 and OpenShift 4 on other ends, that doesn't matter. We can accommodate for all those transforms. This is especially how we deal with KubeVirt and quite frankly, OpenShift Virtualization VMs. It's necessary to transform some of these parameters when you move between clusters.
Yeah.
But making all of this seamless, simple, scalable, we give you the GUI, everything can be addressed as YAML and declaratively automated. And so we basically make it such that it can be seamless automation, policy-based on workloads just by adding an annotation. That's how simple it is to kind of get the full.
It's funny, right? Because I remember talking to, Casten way back when, and they were some of the first that recognized, what encompasses an application in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
And it's more than just a PV. It's more than just a pod definition, right? There's all of these other metadata objects that surround it and all of this other stuff, secrets, config maps, a lot of things that are generated dynamically that all have to go into protecting that application. So it's really, and it's funny, I distinctly remember sitting at the very first CNCF meeting for Kubernetes, in New York City, and there was a debate around whether or not, at the time they were called pet sets, right? Whether or not persistence was even needed inside of Kubernetes, right? Everything should be ephemeral. Everything should be, just deployed and introduced to the cluster. So why do you need things like backup? And, of course, here we are, 27, 28 versions later, and something like that was pre 1.0. So clearly persistence is something that's significant and important. So it just makes sense that a company like Veeam would be integrated and a major player in that arena.
Exactly. So Casten very much complements what Veeam does already on bare metal and VMs. We take that all to the next generation of Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Alex and Michael, do you want to add a little bit more on what we do and how we do it?
Yeah, maybe something that we can share is the observation that we can do almost every day and even every week about customers accelerating the adoption of stateful workload. There are a couple of drivers for that. The acceleration of the adoption of operators is a huge driver for customers bringing data into Kubernetes. And one of the big challenges when you are in this situation is how can I protect my applications? And one of the immediate topics that we used to cover with our customers and prospects are requirements about disaster recovery. This is almost the immediate question that we have when we discover a new customer or new prospect. And for the customers that are now more and more mature with the adoption of Kubernetes and the adoption and the management of stateful application, they even used to mention requirements about application mobility without really calling it that way. But the sweet spots that we use to simplify the life of our customers is really about application mobility. In our case, when we talk about that, we used to explain the way we can move an application from one place to another one. And this is really a hot topic for customers because they are constantly looking for the best way to combine private cloud based on OpenShift and the way they could accelerate also the adoption of the public cloud, leveraging as well different favor of OpenShift into the public cloud. And as soon as we can demonstrate to them that through a quite easy process, they can quite rapidly move an application from one place to another one, all of a sudden you are in the position where you can solve a lot of challenges for customers on the market right now. So definitely adoption of stateful workload, adoption of operators, and that whole discussion around application mobility is really what we are doing right now constantly on a daily basis.
Let me just jump in and answer a few questions and then augment on that. So Steve asked, if it's correct that Veeam's still very much VMware focused. And the long story short is that traditionally, absolutely, right? You could also say that a lot of those VMware workloads are Windows-based, and that would be a majority of our traditional audience. But not so when we're talking about cloud-native workloads. Although this is where OpenShift Virtualization starts to come into the story. We have a lot of customers that are on VMware that have more traditional, VMs, and they need to do application modernization or infrastructure modernization or get me to the public cloud. And by the same token, so that lift and shift strategy we've heard everywhere, and that's nothing new under the sun. What is new is that lift and shift now is to a multi-cloud infrastructure provider called Kubernetes.
Yeah.
And in many cases, that's OpenShift. In fact, the majority of when we're talking about virtualized and more traditional workloads, we're almost exclusively talking about OpenShift virtualization and the KubeVirt project. And so, yes, while Veeam has a lot of more traditional customers, we definitely are driving very much into things like Kubernetes backup, disaster recovery, and application mobility, but also things like Salesforce, Office 365, or Microsoft 365 backup, because even these cloud and SaaS providers don't recommend that you rely on them exclusively for backup and disaster recovery.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. Of AWS actually has a really great document that shows the demarcation between like what they're responsible for and what you're responsible for, and they're responsible for the infrastructure, and can you provision a new EC2 instance? Can you create a new volume, EBS volume? Not like we will guarantee that you can recover precisely the EC2 instance that was there before, that type of stuff.
Right.
So
And by the
it's
same token, ROSA now, right?
Yeah.
Red Hat on Amazon. So yeah, absolutely. So Veeam's very much expanded to basically how do you do backup and recovery across almost anything. So it's a lot more than just the traditional VMware admin to answer that question.
And I'll point out that with OpenShift Virtualization and VMware and any hypervisor for that matter, there's always guest-based agents that you can use, so that from within that operating system, within that virtual machine, you can back up data from inside of there. I think where Veeam has really been successful historically with VMware is doing hypervisor level backups. You can do them more efficiently, more quickly in many ways, right? It's sort of abstracted from all of these things. I think, if I remember correctly, have the ability to like look inside of the guest operating system to extract files out of there and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So, bringing that type of capability, hypervisor level backups, and I don't know about like opening up the disks or anything, but bringing hypervisor level backups into OpenShift Virtualization is fascinating to me. And I say that because like PVs they're different than a traditional virtual machine disk, and OpenShift Virtualization stores VM disks inside of PVCs. So I'm curious to know, and as we go on and as we look at things, I'd love to learn more about all of that. But we'll get there. We'll get there. I'm not overly worried about it. So yeah. So I don't want to cut you off. By all means, go.
There was one more question that I wanted to address, and then bring this all back around. So Mira asked about, can we consider OpenShift API for data protection, right? OADP, similar to K10. I think, Andrew, I'll try to paraphrase. Correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously Red Hat is concerned with data protection and providing some sort of service and addressing that. But there's multiple ways to attack this problem, and OADP is one of the ways. And we've seen it as basically just an API around Valero, and Valero being an open source tool that was originally Heptio Arc and is now managed by VMware. And it's a very basic tool, and OADP is just a nice API declarative wrapper around it. We look at that, especially when we compare that to K10. K10 is our commercial product for doing all of this as a really good fundamental basic tool, a good place to start. But when we talk about what organizations need, especially on the scale of what OpenShift can do on all of its capabilities, especially when we get all the way to OpenShift virtualization, any complex application, any stateful application, just using OADP would be a good start, but I wouldn't say it's complete by any means, and falls short of a lot of the capabilities. And we can go into that, but I don't want to lambast too much. But long story short is that our customers have forced us to do a lot more than what OADP can do on the face.
Yeah, I tried to summarize that in just a few characters there. Of like, to me, I use OADP if I want to like just one time pull out an application, whereas something like K10, it's backup lifecycle management, backup and restore lifecycle management, and a lot of other stuff. So
Right.
Yeah, it's part of your COOP plan, right? Like as a system owner, it's part of your concept of operations at that point. That's what you'd use K10 for that, and ODP would be like your one-off, right? Andrew, is that how you kind of look at it as well?
yeah, Coop plan, man, pulling out the acronyms on us, pal.
Man, I had it written down over here. I've been saving it for like a month and a half now. No, I'm just kidding.
So I don't want to, or I think it would be interesting. I think it would be good if we, I don't know if it's possible to show if we have anything else that we want to, chat about or discuss in that respect. But I'm all about seeing things and asking questions, and I'd love to see what it looks like if that's a possibility.
Yeah, definitely we can do that. You know what? Let me try to share my screen.
Okay.
And I believe you should see my brother with the Casten UI, the Casten K10 UI. Is that okay for you guys?
So I don't see your screen showing up in our menu over here. You might need to reshare it.
Oh, okay, all right. Let's do this, and let me try to share my screen again.
There we go.
That should be okay. Yeah, something, couple of details that we can definitely show you and give you more details. One of the important point when we start discussing, especially with enterprise type of customers, is the way they can operate the overall solution. And one of the thing that really catch the attention of a new administrator, especially operating an OpenShift platform, is the fact that with K10 you have a UI where you can basically perform any type of action when it comes to protect an application in any form or fashion. And just getting a simple UI where you can easily create a policy protecting one application or a set of application with a very low level of effort is quite quickly a great asset. Especially when you try to link that with some security requirements, the fact that you can connect the K10 platform with almost any type of authentication system. We could name the OpenShift authentication mechanism. We could also mention the support of Active Directory or the OADP connector that we have, allowing our customers to implement a multi-factor authentication mechanism to get access and secure the access to K10. Those type of things becomes more and more interesting for the type of population we used to deal with. And on top of that, once you have implemented an authentication mechanism, we can also quite easily show them, and I can do it right now. We can also show to them the capability of K10 to implement a role-based access control. So as soon as you will need to delegate totally or partially some actions on that platform, when you can implement specific roles and add your group of users to those roles and specify a set of actions with the right level of permissions in front of that, immediately you really open the capabilities of the platform, and you can simplify the life for any type of administrator that would like to make application owner or project team a bit more accountable on what they could do. So for instance, if we show you that in the UI, you could basically create a role that would have a scope. That scope could be based on the entire OpenShift cluster, or maybe based on a set of application, for instance. Let's do something like that.
This is one of the things I really love because it enables self-service, right?
Exactly.
You give the app teams the ability to create, manage, restore their own applications.
Exactly. So once you have implemented that authentication mechanism, then you can set up a bunch of different type of roles, redefine the set of action with the level of permissions you would like to give to your users or project owners and so on. And then you can very rapidly implement a kind of self-service action on the Casten UI. So this is something that is really powerful. And one of the important points, especially when we discuss with financial services customer or with customer that will be on the public sector vertical, they are really interested by that type of service in addition of all the rest. But the security aspect, the airbag, and the multi-tenant aspect of the product is really something that is more and more important for them. So that part, pretty interesting.
I'd like to add a little bit. So just for everybody, how do we even get to this point? So Casten K10 is this software application with this web user interface. It has all the APIs, so you can access it all through kubectl. Anything you do through the GUI, you pretty much can do completely automated. And itself, we are in the Red Hat marketplace. So as soon as you create basically a Casten namespace or whatever appropriate to install in, you can use the Casten K10 operator to install it, as well as we have Helm charts. So basically, we are a cloud native application on a cluster that then allows you to do this very much a GUI or multi-cluster, multi-tenant, RBAC, self-service model, or completely automated, controller for how to do your backup and disaster recovery and data protection.
Awesome. Hey, real quick, Alex. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark, about the you have the GUI, but you also have the manifest capability as well, which is awesome. Have y'all done like any integration for like plugins on like Backstage or anything like that? So like Backstage and IDPs, and so that's like the new hotness right now. Platform engineering, it goes into all the self-service conversation. Like, do y'all have plugins for Casten for platforms like that?
At this point in time, I'm not aware of any, but the truth is, this is 100% doable, right? It's a matter of getting the right customer probably to get Michael to be interested in doing that. Michael will talk about some of the other customer asks that we've had, say with Tecton and pipelines. Okay. But for platform engineering, certainly possible. Although I don't think we've explored it yet.
Okay. Most likely, awesome. that should be possible. Yes, and I think it could be a way to go with you too. To just build a wrapper with OADP around Casten.
Yeah, just looking at the RBAC and all the stuff that you can do from that perspective, it seems like that would be an awesome thing to have kind of built into this thing where it's like, oh, hey, look, you're an app developer, you blew yourself up, go click this button and restore yourself.
Yes, awesome. That's one of my demo. I show how you can introduce the backup inside your CI/CD process. So you awesome. Code, you build, and you deploy, but sometimes your change in the code may corrupt the data. It happens very frequently at the moment where you deploy.
That never happens. But that always reminds me of, like, as when I was a VMware administrator, you have regularly scheduled snapshots for like when Patch Tuesday happens, because you never know if something's going to happen, and being able to integrate that in the pipeline, again, super powerful.
Yes, because as you mentioned, it's at some point it may be not on Thursday, but in a random time. So if it could be included inside the CI/CD pipeline, that would be wonderful, and it's perfectly doable with Casten.
So we got a couple of questions that I want to address real quick. So first from Suresh, is the backup performed on a snapshot copy or the live volume?
On the snapshot. So we take the snapshot, we build a clone from the snapshot, then we attach the data mover on it, and we send the data out.
Okay. And I would assume
that is the simplest use case. We've had to deal with much more complex use cases. Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about that and how we do that?
So we can do also what we call logical backup, or we can even leverage the API of the database. So on the first case, the thing we do is the logical backup. So the things I explained. We do what we call a crash consistent backup. Why I'm calling that crash consistent? Because it's consistent with the file system just before the crash, which means that we take a snapshot. A snapshot is all the files in the same time. If you don't take a snapshot, if you do something like Velero, for example, you capture the file system by searching the mount point on the different nodes. and you do a backup on the live PVC. And the consequence of that is that you capture a dirty backup. When you restore, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
The thing is, a proper backup is a snapshot. Then a snapshot is really tied to the storage. So you need to put this snapshot outside of your infrastructure. Besides, you want to have a portable snapshot. You can imagine that you have your application on ODF, for example, with a Rook Ceph, and you want to restore on EBS on AWS. So your snapshot has to be portable. So what we do, we take a snapshot. From the snapshot, we rebuild the volume, and on top of this volume, we attach the data mover to send it out. So that's the first kind of backup. The second kind of backup that we can do is what we call a logical backup. So instead of capturing the PVC, we capture a dump. We capture a MySQL dump, a Postgres dump, an Elastic dump, all kind of dump. And when we restore, we recreate an empty PVC and we execute the restore with the dump. So that's the second one. But something we can do as well is to leverage the eventual backup API. So if I take an example, a classical example is Elasticsearch. If you read the documentation of Elasticsearch, you should not take any snapshot. Well, the reality is that if you take snapshot on Elasticsearch, most of the time when you restore, it's working. But if you read the official documentation, it's clearly stated that you should not take a backup of Elasticsearch with snapshot. And Elasticsearch, the company, is not going to support you if you do that. You have to use the official snapshot API that you can leverage on the Elasticsearch cluster. And we have case where Casten is doing that. Instead of taking the logical backup, instead of taking snapshot, we just leverage this snapshot API. So that's the third kind. And we also do things like working with external database. Sometimes your application is on a namespace, but is communicating with an RDS instance, with a Cloud SQL instance. And we can take backup over there as well. So as soon as you back up your namespace, we trigger a backup on the cloud. Oh, that's also something possible. And we attach the things together, which means that when you restore, we also restore the database out there in the previous state.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's really cool. And I think you touched on something there that I've been saying for years, and usually people give me strange looks, which is snapshots alone are not backups.
No.
They're a point-in-time recovery. And most storage systems, it's, they're not making a clone of that data and calling it a snapshot. It's part of the logical volume. So if the underlying disks fail, your snapshots aren't going to protect you from anything. They're just a point-in-time recovery for that live volume. You have to have a backup. You have to have a separate copy that's stored somewhere else that's not on that same set of disks before you're actually protected. So it's thank you for pointing that out. I think it's something that's really important.
Yeah, and this really starts to highlight why Casten K10. We've had to drive to so many different use cases, so many different situations, and so many different distributions and constraints at our customers' environments, and then have to scale it and make it a general purpose solution that works for all of these different organizations, be it through self-service for that kind of Veeam, VMware admin who's just really used to the GUI. Great, let's use the GUI. But once they start to understand how to apply policies for automated compliance and backup and recovery and imports and disaster recovery, well, then they understand RBAC and self-service and multi-cluster, and then they can delegate back to people. But even then, we try to help people mature our customers to the third stage, which is completely workloads are annotated, applications are backed up and recovered automatically, all based on policy. And we can show you when you drift out of policy compliance. And that's really where we try to drive customers from hands-on, I do it all through the GUI, to, all right, I've automated my policies and I've delegated self-service across multiple clusters, to completely lights out automated governance and recovery everywhere. So that's the journey we take people on. But what Michael also hasn't completely elaborated on, because this is such a nuanced topic with so many layers, is that what does it take to do these application consistent snapshots? How do we trigger Elasticsearch or MongoDB dump? So Casten K10, for the most part, works with CSI drivers back to the storage providers, whatever they are, right? And we drew in volume snapshots, and that's only one small operation. It's probably the most important operation amongst all the serialization of all of the Kubernetes objects, the config maps, the deploy sets, everything, the PVs, as well as the PVCs. All of that information consists of everything that it requires to do an application restore for disaster recovery. So it's not just the snapshot. Yeah. If it were just the snapshot, then you could probably just use Veeam, right? Or all of the other traditional solutions. But that's not what it takes to restore and migrate applications and do disaster recovery in the Kubernetes space. So we've even had to deal with, all right, what if there isn't? What if we're not dealing with CSI storage? What if we're dealing with more traditional storage or off cluster storage or NFS mounts, or even we even drive back to VBR, right? So VBR repositories. So there's not only one way to deal with things. We have to even deal directly back to the VMware file system itself in some cases, because that's where customers are. Right? So yeah, Michael's given you like the second level down. The next level down is that, well, there's lots of permutations of complexity to deal with our customers' traditional environments, traditional constraints. We try to do everything Kubernetes native, and everything that we do is Kubernetes native, but it can reach back to more traditional storage providers and more traditional operations that are required. We'll execute it completely from K10 and from a Kubernetes cluster, but if it requires APIs, CLIs, MongoDB dump, Elasticsearch dump, well, we actually extend K10 with blueprints, and this is an open source project called Canister. And Canister really allows us to not have to customize K10 for every possible situation, right? We build in the native drivers to different file systems, put profiles for compliance around all these different things. But then blueprints are kind of our expansion release mechanism where we can customize to say, all right, bring up a container in this pod with these certain tools like MongoDB dump, do this quiescing operation before allowing K10 to go on, and then snapshot the persistent volumes and so on. And then afterwards, restore those operations to unquiesce, restore back to a load balancer, bring up MongoDB, as complex as needed orchestrational operations in the traditional world, we can shell out to, we can provide those tools all from the Kubernetes control plane, but they can do the most traditional operations as needed. And that's how we really meld the world together and deal with all the enterprise complexity of what it requires to kind of bring applications on OpenShift, no matter what form they come in, to a safe and auditable and restorable world of data protection.
Yeah, auditable being important. Steve, I see your questions there. I'm going to skip over them briefly because I know Mark, like that's right up your alley. I don't think you might have paid Steve, I'm not sure, to ask those questions. I want to address Mira's question there about so why do we not back up from the live volume? What's the difference doing it with the snapshot? Doesn't this use more storage? I feel like I'm missing something. So Michael, I don't know if that's something you want to
I can answer this question very quickly. I just need to share my screen, just like 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I'm sorry, is it just...
Yeah, we have these discussions all of the time. And
yes, all the time, but I think we should address it.
Because again, there's many levels of maturity of understanding how to do disaster recovery, but also how do we deal with persistence in Kubernetes?
So the question basically is it correct to do a backup on a live volume? Why should we use snapshots? And that's a fair question. So I'm going to explain that. So imagine that you do a backup on a live volume, something which is constantly changing. You see my screen, by the way?
Yes, now it's coming in clear. Yeah,
it's clear. Okay. So let's take a very classical example of a parent relationship in a database. So you have an invoice text file, which is storing invoice, and you have a line invoice text file, which is storing the line invoice referencing the first file invoice. So this is a very classical parent relationship. So let's imagine that you create this data at T1, at time 1. And then at time 2, you create a second invoice with the corresponding children. line invoice 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and so on. So I think everybody understands at this point. But question, what happens if your volume is huge and the time to back up the first file and the time to back up the second times are not the same? Let's imagine, for example, that you back up invoice at T1 and you back up line invoice at T2. When you restore, you find yourself in this situation. Children with no parents. Or it could be the contrary. You back up invoice at T2, but you back up line invoice at T1. Then you've got parents with no children. Yeah. And it's why we say backing up a live volume is going to be not crash consistent. Only Snapshot provide crash consistency.
The snapshots are important because they quiesce the data at that point in time.
Sometimes they are not quiescing the data.
Most depends on the application whether that's true, Andrew.
Yeah, but it will depend on the storage provider actually. But some technology does not quiesce anything. They are very smart and they are able to do that this way.
But at least at the point when the snapshot was taken, there's no other changes that are happening there. So you very much avoid this scenario.
And all the files are exactly captured at the same time. So it's why we say crash consistent with the file system before the crash. That's what it means. And it's very, very important to use Snapshot and to be able to protect Snapshot.
Yeah. So I think to answer the other part of your question, Mira, so doesn't this use more storage?
Maybe you can.
Yeah, maybe. I think it depends on your particular storage vendor and how they do, storage protection. Oops, clicking the wrong button here. Excuse me, not storage protection, but how they implement snapshots. So some storage vendors, they use like a log append file system so that the only additional capacity that's used is effectively the data that changes. So if I have 1 gigabyte of data, I take a snapshot and 3 megabytes of that data gets changed, the snapshot only consumes 3 megabytes of capacity. Yeah, some storage vendors implement snapshots as a duplicate of the volume. And, so if I have 1 gigabyte of data and I snapshot it, it's now 2 gigabytes of data, one in the snapshot, one in the original. So yeah, it's really up to your storage vendor.
Exactly. And this is why your mileage will vary to answer these questions, right? Everything is nuanced and it comes down pretty much to the particular permutation of all of the vendors and all of the configuration in each environment. And they can vary for the same vendors with just slightly different configurations. So in order to do volume snapshots from CSI, it is pretty much a big, huge monolithic blob that can take that. And if the storage vendor is advanced enough to try to figure out the deltas and make that transparent happen, that happens. But for the most part, we're dealing with longer backup windows because we are doing monolithic volume snapshots of these PVs, of these persistent volumes. And so that is why one of the projects that Casten Engineering is involved in is the Kubernetes Enhancement Proposal 3314 for change block tracking to be added to CSI.
I was going to ask.
And so this is something that we're actually working and coordinating a little bit with Red Hat Engineering and even the KubeVirt project, although we're in the very early stages of these discussions. In fact, we're still kind of establishing these discussions. But long story short is that, we're interested in making sure that these backup windows, and now we do more than just the persistent volume snapshots, right? It's everything around the application as needed. That's where we're trying to make these backup windows as small as possible and as efficient as possible, such that we're not dealing with huge monolithic blobs of volume snapshots each and every time you have a backup window in the worst case scenario. And that is certainly a huge concern of our customers, because especially our Veeam customers coming to Kubernetes and saying, why do I have to have, the same size backup for every volume snapshot as the original source? Where's my change block tracking? So we're trying to address that for the entire industry and move CSI, Kubernetes, and the storage industry and the backup industry all forward together.
And if I can rephrase that a little bit, Mark, so what you're talking about is the difference more or less between a full backup each time versus incremental backups.
Exactly.
Whereas, so today there is no change block tracking. There is no ability to determine what has changed or only what has changed since the last backup. So every time you take a backup, my PVC is 1 gigabyte. It's 1 gigabyte of data that's stored on the backup system each time. With change block tracking, incremental backups, it's maybe the first one is 1 gigabyte, and then everything after that is only going to be, literally what changed.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so this is an expectation that everybody has coming from the traditional world of VMs and bare metal and Veeam. When we get to Kubernetes, again, it depends on the storage provider exactly what is capable. And so we have cloud providers and storage providers, and OpenShift data protection has some of these capabilities, but to expose it to Kubernetes consistently, to make the operations consistent no matter what the vendor or no matter what the situation, that's what we're working on with the Kubernetes enhancement proposal for change block tracking.
Very cool. While we have a moment, do you want to go ahead and address Steve's questions and maybe Prakash as well?
Sure. So Alex and Michael, would you say that Casten is free? And would you say that it's open source? I'll let you answer it. I know my answer.
I can. Okay, I can go first on this one. So Casten K10 has a free license that we used to allow customers and everybody to test and evaluate the product. So basically, when you deploy the first time Casten K10, during the first month, you will get directly embedded into the product a trial license that will allow you to deploy K10 on a cluster having up to 50 worker nodes, so 50. And after that first month of trial, automatically that embedded license will be converted into a free license that will allow you then to cover or protect a cluster having up to 5 worker nodes. The objective of that free license is to allow you to evaluate the product, so you won't get any limitation or restrictions on the functionalities or the features of the product itself. It will allow you to test the whole product without any limitation. The only restriction will be about the support, the access to the Veeam and the Casten support itself. You won't be allowed to open a case because you are not supposed to protect production environment with that free license. So from that perspective, there is a free license embedded into the product. Everybody can download and install K10 on a Kubernetes cluster, and you will get access to all the features of the product. That's the current situation right now.
I got to say that aligns pretty well with the OpenShift developer license as well, right? You get, what is it, 16 entitlements, Jonny? No charge. You can use them for single user, non-production use cases. And, we were talking a minute ago about, integrating with pipelines and stuff like that. Now you can do all of that in your development cluster.
Same approach, same logic.
Yeah. So Casten K10 is a commercial license. It's not open source. However, we've talked already about all of the kind of needs to do these complex data operations for quiescing and application consistent backups. And that is an open source project, Canister, and that can be used by anybody. You don't have to use it with K10. And we have a few folks actually using it. So that's on GitHub and all that stuff. And that is one of our 3 open source projects. So we very much contribute to the community. We're very much working with engineering at Red Hat, upstream and downstream in the open source community, as well as even all the way back up to Kubernetes and the CNCF.
Yeah, maybe we can speak about Copia as well. Copia is a very important project for us because it's our data mover. And Copia is an open source project, and we have something like 3 or 4 developers that are completely dedicated to work with Copia. So we really contribute actively to Copia. And Copia is used in many other use cases than Casten. But we are the main contributor of Copia today.
Yep. We've had many years invested in this open source project. Wow.
Yeah. And so Prakash asks, does Casten handle application-aware and crash-consistent backup by integrating with pre- and post activities for various applications? And Mark, I know you were talking earlier about,
That's exactly,
or no,
yeah.
I'm sorry, it was Michael talking about logical backups. I don't know if those two are the same, or maybe.
Not exactly the same. We have some use case where you are not taking logical backup, but you need to do few things like flushing and freezing, and unlock and unfreezing when the backup is finished. We support that as well. I didn't speak of this use case, but this is one of the use cases. Yes.
Yeah, and this is definitely an area where open source Canister project helps. These blueprints help do these before and after actions to kind of get to that application consistent backup.
Makes sense. Yeah. So effectively, and now, gosh, I'm going back like 20 years, trying to remember SQL commands for like how to quiesce a database. You create the snapshot and then you unquiesce, and now you have yeah.
Right.
Some blueprint are doing that. Yeah.
Yep. And so canister.io, we have GitHub, we have example blueprints for MySQL, Microsoft SQL, Postgres, etc. And this is, for those traditional workloads that show up in Kubernetes or, appear under OpenShift Virtualization as well, right? And how do we, again, if we can coordinate this all through one namespace, again, Casten looks at this world as applications, and we try to make the clusters a lot more ephemeral. Right. That's really our stance. And that's really how we help our customers get to these, enterprise requirements to do disaster recovery such. And more importantly, I would say a special case of disaster recovery is the application mobility, right? Snapshotting an existing application and restoring it on the same cluster for a staging instance, for a development instance, that's to troubleshoot sometimes in production. That's a perfectly valid use case of what our disaster recovery and application mobility capabilities are. On the same cluster, on a different cluster, doesn't matter. We can do that. And that's exactly the scenarios that we open up for customers to deal with applications that are stateful.
You know what? Probably we can try to show all of that in action.
I was just going to say, we fork the conversation. Let's bridge it back and see what it looks like.
Okay, let me share again my screen, because this is what we wanted to show you. Let me know if you can see my screen again.
Yep, it'll de-blurry itself here in a second.
Okay, all right. So just in the meantime, what we're capable to demonstrate today is basically we have two types of environments. The source environment is based on OpenShift deployed in Azure using the ARO service. And on top of that OpenShift cluster, of course, we have deployed K10. This is the interface that you can see on my screen right now. And if I go on the application view, basically, I will be capable to list all the namespaces, all the applications running at that time on that OpenShift cluster. So if I use the filter function in the UI, I can notice that there is one specific namespace called arrive-pacman, and this application is basically a stateful application. And what we can try to show right now is the way we can create a policy and protect this application running on OpenShift in Azure. The policy that we have created will create a backup, a local backup that will remain into the source environment. And once the local backup will be done, then automatically K10 will create what we call an export. So basically it will be about offloading a copy of the local backup into an external storage repository. In that case, we are going to leverage an AWS S3 bucket to get a copy outside of the production environment. And something that could be interesting, for instance, would be to take that backup, take that K10 export located in AWS, and try to restore the same application on a different cluster. And then on the secondary site, on the disaster recovery site, let's call it that way, we have a bare metal OpenShift cluster running into a demo center, a data center based in Switzerland, in the demo center of HP, where we have a bare metal OpenShift cluster. And probably we can try to restore this application over there. And during the restore process, there are a couple of challenges that we can highlight during that demo. The first challenge will be about reconfiguring the PVC with a different storage class, because of course, between an application running in Azure and the same application running on a bare metal cluster in a private cloud, necessarily the storage service will be different. So the challenge is how can we easily reconfigure the PVC during the restore process to make sure that during the restore process, the PVC will claim a persistent volume from the right storage service. So this is one of the challenge that you will have to deal with when it comes to move an application from one place to another one. And something specific in that case, because we will move between OpenShift into the public cloud and OpenShift on-premise, will be about how can I reconfigure the root itself. In this example, we have two different environments and two different DNS domain. And when it comes to restart that application on the destination site, the other challenge could be how can I easily reconfigure my route to make sure that I will use the DNS domain that I have implemented into my private cloud. So that's the type of thing we can try to show you, and it will be for us the opportunity to demonstrate the power of that application mobility use case that we have in that case. So if we move on, let's go back on the main UI and try to have a look to the policy view. Into that view, we have a specific policy that will allow me to protect the arrive-pacman namespace that I've mentioned just before. So if I click on edit, I can quickly show you the way you can define the policy, because everything will start in K10, everything will start from the definition of a policy. So things are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You will define the type of action that you want to perform. And of course, at the beginning, you will need to create a backup and an export. So that's the reason why you need to select the snapshot type of action. Then basically, you will need to select the backup frequency. If I try to change the setup of the policy, you can see that there are a bunch of different options to define the backup frequency, but we could assume that I would like to run a backup on a daily basis at 2 a.m. in the morning. And once the backup frequency is defined, then I could select the snapshot retention, because at the beginning, we will create a local snapshot, and starting from that local snapshot, and especially the snapshot created through the CSI driver, we will leverage that to create then an export that will be offloaded outside of that production environment. So in order to manage the rotation of the local snapshot, we have a snapshot retention policy or strategy that you can rely to manage that part of the process. Once it's done, you can also ask K10 to automatically create that famous export that will allow you to offload your backup outside of the production environment. And the logic is pretty much the same. You have a frequency to define. In that specific case, you will need to define and provide the different parameters to get access to this external storage repository. So we used to call that a location profile. So we have defined one in that environment. And same thing on that external storage repository, you could decide to apply exactly the same retention strategy between local backup and exports, or you could decide to have a bigger retention on that external storage repository, and you could decide to implement a specific retention strategy for the exports. So all of that is completely flexible, and you can exactly define the parameters that you would like to use. Then the question would be, how can I select the applications that will be protected by this policy? So that's pretty straightforward. Once again, on one side, you could select applications by using their name. And on the other side, in order to get something a bit more flexible, a bit more dynamic, you could leverage the labels from a Kubernetes standpoint. So think about having a label by default position in all the applications in production, like backup equal true. You could define exactly the same label into the policy, and automatically, when there is a match between labels on applications and labels into the policy, K10 will automatically protect those applications with the settings that you have defined into that policy.
So Alex, a question about that. So you said that, so today I have maybe 4 applications that match a particular label. Tomorrow I deploy a 5th one. It would automatically pick up and start backing up that application?
Correct.
Yep.
Absolutely correct. And if we continue to move on, by default, on one side, of course, we will leverage the snapshot through the CSI capabilities. But on the other side, when we run a backup, we will also, by default, capture the entire namespace with all the Kubernetes object and specifications. Now, if you need to be a bit more granular into that process during the backup and also during the restore process, you could leverage the filter function. And for instance, you could ask K10 to only backup, and this is just an example, only backup the persistent volume for all the namespaces, all the applications that will be covered or protected by this policy. So you could exactly define what you want to include, what you want to exclude in terms of Kubernetes object. And that logic, you can apply it at the namespace level, basically, but you could do also exactly the same thing for all the resources that will be deployed at the cluster scope level. So especially if you have applications deploying or consuming specific CRDs or cluster roles or cluster role bindings, you could ask K10 during the same backup process to also capture those informations at the cluster level, and you will get exactly the same logic. If you need to be a bit more specific, a bit more granular, you will be capable to leverage the same type of filters, for instance. So you can be very granular in the way you want to protect your applications. Just for the purpose of that demonstration, we are going to keep things simple in the way we define the policy. And basically, I will trigger that policy manually, but we will keep the export function enabled, and we will offload a copy of that local backup on that AWS S3 bucket. So if we run manually the policy, let's do something like that and click on yes. So if we go back on the main dashboard,
I just want to add one thing here, Alex. Along the way, we've had YAML buttons at the bottom of the dialogues. So again, this is all being done through the GUI, but all of these actions are declarative. You can export the YAML and therefore download it, kube control, apply it later on. You don't have to use the GUI. We're CLI friendly and of course API friendly as well.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, Jonny, tagging on your thing, GitOps, right? Of being able to manage your backup policies and rules through GitOps, and
yeah, I think it's awesome.
So if you have a quick look on the execution of the policy, you can see on the screen that at the beginning, K10 will execute the backup action, and once it will be done, then automatically we will start working on the creation of the export. So during the export phase, once again, it will be about creating a copy of that local backup, getting all the persistent data, all the Kubernetes specification, getting all of that into a specific object that we used to call an export. And during the export process, by default, thanks to our data mover Copia, K10 by default will deduplicate, compress, and encrypt the export that we will offload into that external storage repository. Okay. So just in the meantime, the export will probably take 1 or 2 minutes. There is something else that we can show you on the way you can implement the product in your environment. We used to talk since a couple of minutes about leveraging an external storage repository. This is something that we called location profile, for instance. And if I edit this one, this is exactly the way you can configure an external NFS export or any type of object storage service that you could leverage into the public cloud or into your private cloud if you have any type of object storage solution available. So all of that can be used, and you can create as much location profile as you would need. Okay, so this is exactly what we've done before by setting up this demo environment.
So Alex, real quick, as far as authentication is concerned, like I saw that you're in this case you're using Amazon or S3 as the storage provider. Are you able to hook into like OAuth for another like a vault or even like a key cloak or something like that to like the extra cluster or to that service that might be fronting that storage service?
That's a good point. Probably Michael.
That wasn't a question to be mean. I was just curious. If not,
we can answer that. We can answer that. So yes, there's many different forms of authentication, and profiles can use specific authentication required for each different provider. But in general, yeah, no, we support LDAP, OAuth, Active Directory, etc. Yes.
I'm not sure we're speaking about the same thing. There is authentication to the dashboard,
right,
which is true. We use OADP, we support OpenShift authentication, we support LDAP, Active Directory authentication, basic auth, and all that stuff. Or are you speaking about authentication for accessing the location profile, for example?
the location profile, yeah. So
So,
like,
yeah. So in this case, we leverage, if you most of the time, we are working with access key and secret key for the S3 bucket, but we also support assuming roles.
okay,
Was it your question? And we also support workload identity when we're working with the Google bucket. And if we are working with things like NFS, in this case, there is no authentication matter because, well, NFS is basically something that does not require authentication most of the time.
okay. But if we had to set up, so say if we were super crazy restrictive and we had NFS with authentication, NFS v4, whatever, we could set all that up. Would that be possible?
Yes, and
Okay.
I can explain why, because what we ask to the customer is to first create the PVC from NFS and referencing the name of this PVC in the
makes
profile.
sense.
So
Yeah.
you still have the control of how you create your PVC or your NFS share.
Okay, gotcha. No, that totally makes sense.
All right, so as you can see on the screen now, the backup and the export is done successfully, which is, of course, good news. And now the thing that we will need to do is to go on that destination environment, try to import the export that we have offloaded into that S3 bucket, and see how we can restore and especially transform that application to make sure that the PVC will work with the right storage class, and see how we can potentially reconfigure the root in order to restore the networking access to this application. So just on that source environment, you can have a look and note that the DNS name is based on azure.casten.io. Okay, this is the source environment. Now, if I try to go on the DR site and I'm going to change the UI in that case, you can see that, of course, the color of the UI is different. And you can also notice and pay attention to the DNS domain name, which is redhat.hpcic.net. Okay, so this is the way to really show you that we have completely changed the environment. On that destination site, once again, OpenShift bare metal cluster K10 is installed. If we have a look to the UI, that's of course pretty much the same. And the first thing that we need to do on that destination site would be to figure out the way to import and get that export right now located into that S3 bucket available on that destination site. So the first thing to do basically is to create what we call an import policy. So the import policy is pretty simple. We need to select the other type of action on the opposite of what we've done on the source environment. Once again, just for the purpose of that demonstration, I'm going to execute manually on demand that import policy. And in order to make sure that I'm going to import the right K10 exporter, we need to provide a kind of specific token, which is actually an encryption key used to encrypt my export on my source environment. I can very easily fetch that encryption key from the UI from the source environment. I did it before just to save a couple of minutes from during the demonstration, but basically that information comes from the source environment. And at this stage, basically, we just need to run that import policy. The execution of the import policy is pretty quick because at this stage, we don't move the export out from the location profile itself. We just open it thanks to the encryption key and extract a couple of metadata to add to the inventory on the K10 application the additional restore point that we have exported at the previous stage. So the execution of that import policy is pretty quick, whatever the size of the export that you will need to leverage for the next action that will be the restore process. So as you can see, it's almost done and it's okay. So now we have imported that new restore point.
Yeah, so we see 35 specifications or YAMLs, right? Those configurations of various different Kubernetes objects. We even see that K10 is even created and used a canister blueprint on the fly to kind of help instrument this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last step is, how can I restore now this application on different environments, different type of storage infrastructure, and different type of cloud, let's put it that way. So if I go back on the application view and try to see if the arrive pacman is there, we can see that the application is not yet there because we have not yet restored this application. So if we go on this removed view, I can now see the restore point that we have just imported. So if I click on restore there, and for instance, select the last export or restore points available, I will now be capable to work on the restore point panel and define the way I would like to restore my application. So just to show you what we can see from the UI, if I scroll down from the interface, I can now see all the content available into that restore point. So I can see there is a persistent volume claim available into my export. That persistent claim comes from a storage class called Managed Premium, and this is something that belongs to the Azure storage infrastructure. Of course, when it comes to restore this application on my new environment, this is typically the type of things I would like to reconfigure, change, transform. And if I continue to scroll down, I will see all the Kubernetes specifications and objects that K10 by default will restore during that process. Of course, we've presented to you the different filters that are available during the backup process, and exactly the same way you can select or unselect the objects that you would like to restore. So by default, we will restore everything, but you could decide to restore only a specific config map or a specific secret or a specific PVC if this is something that would be required for you. Now, let's talk about the transformations. This is really something that is powerful in the K10 solution. If I try to enable the transform engine, this is really where I will be capable to explain to K10 how I would like to reconfigure a PVC or how I would like to reconfigure a route. So in my case, I'm going to show you how to do it manually, and then I will show you what we call the transform set, which is basically a kind of library or transformation that you can create over time, and you will be capable to reuse multiple time existing transform actions that you could have defined previously.
And
so let's...
Alex, I think you're getting ready to answer this question from Christopher of, does it restore the PVC data inside CSI? And I don't know what COSI is. I'm not familiar with that acronym.
COSI is about object storage.
Yes.
API. It's
CSI is block, COSI is object.
Got it.
Object. So does it restore PVC data inside? It restores the data inside the PVC from the object storage, but we don't. We export to the object storage, but we don't do any restoration inside the object storage. We leverage the object storage to restore inside the PVC.
Okay.
I'm not sure I answered properly the question, but well, feel free to comment my answer.
Got it. Because I interpreted it as, when you do a restore, does it restore it to the existing PVC, or does it create a new PVC and effectively your application?
Okay, we completely wipe out the existing PVC and we create some new fresh PVC all the time.
Got it.
Because restore is always an exceptional situation. So
yeah,
we don't do any incremental restore. We do incremental backup, but we don't do incremental restore.
Got it.
So basically, when it comes to transform a PVC, this is the way it works on the Casten side. So of course, you will have to select the right resource, which makes sense. And then you will have to define the type of operation that you would like to apply on this type of resource. So let's add a new operation. As you can see in the UI, there are a bunch of different type of operations that you could apply on Kubernetes resources. In the specific case about reconfiguring a persistent volume claim, we are going to select the replace type of action. So if we do that, we need to provide the JSON pointer path to the definition of the storage class, and then we will have to provide the value. So basically, the name of the storage class that we would like to use in order to replace, in my case here, the managed premium storage class that is defined in my export. So if I want to do that, basically, I will need to provide the path to the resource I would like to modify. And in order to identify the storage class I would like to use, this is not something that Casten K10 can define on your behalf. This is the type of parameter that you will have to provide to K10. And once you have provided the right parameter, the right fitting, then K10 will operate that transformation for you. So if we try to very quickly see which storage class we would like to use. Of course, this is not the right one. This is here. I would like to get the list of the storage class. We are going to reuse basically the default one. So this is the storage class that we would like to apply for this definition of this transform action. So basically by doing this, I'm telling to K10 to, during the restore process, reconfigure the PVC by replacing managed premium by that storage class available on my destination environment. And just to make sure that this transform action will be properly executed, I can even test that type of operation from the K10 UI. So if I click on the test button, I can select the persistent volume claim that I can see here, click on this arrow and try to compare what is the definition of my object before and after the transform action. So let's try to scroll down a bit and I can see the definition of the storage class here. And if I try to scroll down once the transformation will be applied, I can see that the name of the storage class will be different. And this is exactly the setting that we would like to position during the restore process. So this is a way to validate and verify that the transformation that we are defining will work properly.
Alex, if I could just join in, here's another example. We've had to do this for OpenShift virtualization. You know, we need to delete the IP address, delete the MAC address, because those will be re-provisioned either on the fly or against a different set of policies. So we, and in some cases, we've actually built in these transformations or made them part of a library, or even built them completely to make them transparent, because we understand specific VMI, objects, so we can do these transforms automatically. But prior to us building in that automation, people had to do this, and they used these native capabilities to allow the proper restoral operations.
Yes, absolutely. And if I can give you another example on how to reconfigure, for instance, a root, because we are changing the OpenShift cluster. In that case, the domain name is completely different. You could do something like that, and we are going to use as well the test operation to show you how we can verify that the change of the root will work properly. So of course, I will need to remove the definition of the storage class and add the specific parameter in my example. And once again, if I click on test operation, and if I try to select the root, which is there, I can see that, of course, the definition of the root coming from the backup or the export that we are going to use to restore this application is using the previous definition related to the Azure infrastructure that we had on the source environment. And if I try to validate the transformation that I would like to perform, I can see that probably I did something wrong. I did something wrong there.
This is fascinating to me. I had no idea that Casten could do this.
This is awesome.
Effectively, making it super simple to, like, you don't even have to have application level awareness going in. Like, you can use Casten to truly do the entire recovery process, not, hey, dump the YAML, somewhere, let me make some modifications because it's a different cluster. Like, all of it is handled. That's amazing.
Yes. Go ahead, Michael.
Michael, you may be on mute if you were adding.
No, I don't know why it does not work. It should work, but
I did something wrong probably in the copy and paste.
Yes, most likely. But
Yeah.
well, hey, I don't think we're going to solve that right now. But yeah,
No.
we can use regapps with captures of group inside the regapps and rewrite completely URL. This is a very classical use case when we especially when you are migrating ingress or migrating root, you need that.
I just want to say this because I just want to say this guy's username. I will kick you 67 said that it worked. You were just looking at the status. Sorry, I could have let that go, but that username was too good to let go. So
You're saying 5 minutes?
Yeah. 5 minutes is fine, Michael. Thank you.
But basically, we have already combined, and I will show you that during the restart process. Basically, we have combined those two transform actions into one transform set. So that's the reason why I decided to click on add a reference to an existing transform set. So this OCP cloud migration will combine the change or the reconfiguration of the PVC with the storage class, and same thing about the root. So let's try to use that. I'm going to click on restore. I'm going just to do an additional modification before restoring the application, and hopefully we won't get the demo effect and everything will work properly. But just before restoring, and just in order to illustrate the filter function that you can leverage during the restore process, if I try to scroll down up to the bottom, you will see, of course, because it's coming from the source environment, the definition of the initial storage class. So this is typically the type of resource that we don't want to restore in that example, because it doesn't make sense to restore the setting for the managed premium storage class on this environment based on a private cloud infrastructure. So just an example or the way to illustrate the way you can leverage that filter function. Okay. So at this stage, we are ready to restore the application. Let's try to do it. Let's click on restore. And let's see if everything will be restored properly. So on the main dashboard, you can see that the restore action will start really soon. And in the meantime, probably we can go back on the OpenShift management console and try to see what's going on from an OpenShift management console perspective. So let's go on the, let's go on the pods view and try to go on the Arrive Pacman namespace. That is already restored, by the way. And now from the UI, you can see that during the restore process, we are going to trigger a couple of temporary pods. So that's the case for the Affinity PVC pod, where we will try to identify the most relevant workload into that cluster in order to restore the PVC. And during that phase, we will also operate and reconfigure the change of the storage class. So this is typically the moment where we will apply the transform that we have defined during the restore process. So it's going to take a couple of seconds. Basically, it's pretty quick. And once we have restored the PVC and we have claimed the new persistent volume from the new storage class, then we trigger the restore data pod, which is another temporary pod that will be responsible for basically copying the data from that external storage repository where our export is still located to the new persistent volume that we have claimed from the storage class on the destination site. And once we have restored the persistent data of this application, we are going to leverage the deployment file to redeploy the application. So this is what you can see right now on the screen. And of course, at the same time, we should have sooner or later a new route available as well, with hopefully the right path, the right DNS name. So
it looked like actually it was okay. We were looking at the status, not at the host of the spec. So most likely you're good.
Let's see. Let's click on route.
It's going to work.
And fortunately, we have a route with apparently the right DNS name. So if we click on this link, we can see that this application is available, and I can use that application, which is basically the famous Pac-Man video game. Okay. So it was a way for us to show you how you can move an application from one site to another one. In that case, it was a kind of migration between OpenShift running into the public cloud to an OpenShift platform running on premise. It could be the other way around. Actually, it doesn't really matter for us. We can move an application from one side to another one, and this was something we wanted to show you, especially when we talk and when we discuss with OpenShift administrator. They used to be really interested by the way it can be easy to move such type of application from one place to another one.
No, this is really awesome. I mean, even as a developer, we talked earlier about different capabilities for integrating for development type purposes of copying data out or replicating an application into a development cluster, or a CI/CD pipeline, and being able to duplicate all of that. And it's really awesome to me. So I think I hope we've covered quite a bit of stuff here. I feel like we've covered quite a bit. I know I have learned a tremendous amount. So for our audience, just a couple minutes left. So if you have any questions, anything that you want to send in, please go ahead and do that now, and we'll do our best to answer any questions while we're here on the stream. That being said, if you're not watching us live, if anything occurs to you afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out. So you can, of course, reach out to me at andrew.sullivan@redhat.com or on social media at @practicalAndrew. So I'm on Twitter and Reddit and all of the places and all of the things. You can reach out to Jonny at Jonny, Jonny, @redhat.com or JRockTX1. I will also put in a plug for the Kubernetes Slack channel, or Slack team. What are they called? Slack
channel.
Yeah, channel. Yeah. Anyways, the Kubernetes Slack, where there's a OpenShift users channel on there. It's a great place to go and connect with the community. Jonny and I are there, along with a whole bunch of other Red Hatters. So it's a great way to interact with us. So, Prakash, does Casten take etcd backups?
That question is for you.
Okay. Yes, of course. We have a blueprint for that. Because as you know, the etcd pod is not a managed pod. It's I can't remember exactly the name, but well, we deal with that, and we are able to take etcd backup. But don't get me wrong, you're not going to restore etcd. It's interesting to take a backup of etcd for forensic reason or for eventually legal reason, but you're not going to restore etcd. If you are in the situation where you restore etcd, it really means that you are in a very, very bad situation.
I'm so happy to hear somebody other than me saying that.
Yeah, okay. No, the right approach is recreate a cluster.
Yeah.
Install Casten, restore the catalog, and then restore all your applications. That's the right way to do it.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate the perspective there. I think they're called system pods, although their etcd is now managed by an operator. But regardless, it uses local storage, right? There is no ability to take a snapshot or anything like that. You have to do.
No, but we do support that because multiple customer and very important customer are asking for that. But yeah, my recommendation is yes, it makes sense for forensic or legal reasons, but not anything else.
Yeah, it's not a disaster recovery mechanism.
Absolutely.
Not at all. And this is one of the first questions that we usually get asked after, why stateful workloads on Kubernetes, then the next thing is, well, isn't etcd backup good enough? And the answer is no, not ever. And so that's really just helping our customers progress along to understand persistence, Kubernetes objects, disaster recovery, and all the nuances that we've started to cover here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Michael, Mark, Alex, I really appreciate you joining us today. Jonny, it's good to be back in the saddle with you. That sounded weird, but you know what I mean. So
Indeed.
this has been fascinating, and I'm really happy that you all were able to join today. So Michael, Mark, Alex, if you have anything that you want to close with, anything you want to add, by all means.
Who wants to go first, guys?
Alex, you go first.
Alex, you spoke up first.
Okay, all right. No, it was. I was really happy to be there with you guys. I hope that the demo was useful for people to really understand the capabilities of the solution. Of course, there are plenty of other topics that we could cover as well. Michael had a great presentation about how to integrate K10 into the Tecton pipeline. We could also have done a demonstration on how we can protect workload/virtual machines using or leveraging OCPV. Actually, the process is exactly the same. There is no difference between the demo we did today and doing the same demo for the OpenShift virtualization type of use case. This is absolutely exactly the same. And this is fully transparent from an administrator perspective. So we could have discussed about multiple other things. But the idea was just to give you an overview about the capabilities of the product, and hopefully people will get the opportunity to test and evaluate K10 in the future.
Michael, would you like to add anything?
Yes, just one thing that may sound stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm speaking to OpenShift Admin. Do not try to develop your own backup solution. I'm speaking from my experience. Do not try that. It's a very bad idea.
OC copy, is that a good idea?
No. Rely on a professional solution, especially for the backup. This is absolutely sensitive. It's very important. Don't give up to this temptation.
And just to add and bring it all together, I mean, that is why we're excited to be a good Red Hat partner. That's why we'll be at Red Hat Summit. But most importantly, it's because we solve these problems for our joint customers together on the largest scale, and we meet them where they're ready, right? If you're the VMware admin with Windows workloads, you can use the GUI. If you're ready to kind of do everything declaratively, well, let's export the YAMLs if you need to do it in the GUI or not. And then let's start kube control applying those. And then correspondingly, when you're ready to do this all through operator-driven aspects and installs and such, we're already ready to meet you there. And in fact, we didn't even talk about this, but Canister even drives operators, right? So we're really very much ready to meet you where you are and very much take you through all the stages of maturity to finally drive how do you do data protection of any application on any cluster, on any provider. This is what we do with Red Hat over and over again for the largest customers in the world. And we're ready to prove it and push to the next steps of what's needed to do it even better.
Yeah, so I'll throw you under the bus, Mark, because your contact information is there on the screen. So anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Jonny or I. We'll make sure to include the team from Casten here, or you can of course reach out to Mark directly, since he volunteered his contact information. I don't ever ask folks to do that because you never know what's going to happen. All right. So to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, if you are not watching us live, if anything occurs to you later, don't hesitate to reach out to the team from Casten. Thank you so much. This has been really enjoyable and really informative. So greatly appreciate your time. And Jonny, I will see you at the same OpenShift time on the same OpenShift channel next week.
I'll be there.
All right. Last words, Jonny?
No, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Would love to have you back. I want to see the pipeline demo and everything else. I'm a nerd, so I'd love to see all this stuff. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Jonny. Thank you, Andrew.